Hello, I'm Don Nystrom, and in our studio today we have Tom Tiffany, who is a Republican candidate for the 7th Congressional District, as you know, formerly occupied by Sean Duffy, who retired in 2019. Tom is one of the candidates that will be on the partisan primary, which is going to be on February 18th. And then after that, if he's successful, he will be on the special election on May 12th. So, Tom, thank you for coming in. We appreciate it very much. We'd like to give you the opportunity to tell the folks why you're running, a little bit about your background, current background.
Yeah, well, thank you, Don. I really appreciate you folks having me here, and good to be back in Marshfield. In fact, I was just here on Friday night, and we had an event down here, met a lot of people in Marshfield, but then I had the opportunity to go over to the Columbus girls basketball game, and met a lot of people over there, and they had some halftime activities that were going on to get the kids, really, the real young kids, involved with basketball. They got a terrific program over there, so it was really a lot of fun to go over there. And but yeah, and that's what I've been doing, Don, is covering the entire district since Congressman Duffy announced his resignation the end of August of 2019. I've been out there campaigning throughout that period of time. So I grew up on a dairy farm, western Wisconsin, a little town, Elmwood, Wisconsin, 5 brothers, 2 sisters, and Mom and Dad taught us the value of hard work, and all of us have went on, all of my siblings, we've went on to own and operate small businesses. My wife and I, we owned Wilderness Cruises up on the Willow Flowage. Now, in between that, when I left home, went to college, have an agricultural degree from UW River Falls, put that to use for a number of years. And then I moved to the Minocqua area about 30 years ago, and met my wife there, my wife Chris, and we owned and operated Wilderness Cruises on the Willow Flowage for 2 decades. We have 3 daughters, Carlin, Lexi, and Catherine, 2 of them in college, 1 still in high school. And in 2010, I decided to run for the state legislature, and I was elected to the state assembly, served 2 years, went on to the state senate. I've been there finishing up my 2nd term, and very proud of our accomplishments that we've done in the legislature. When I came in, we had a $3.6 billion deficit. That deficit is gone. Unemployment was almost double digits, almost 10%. Jobs were fleeing the state of Wisconsin. Now employers have a heck of a time finding employees, as we see those help wanted signs all over our local communities. And just really proud of how we got our state back on firm fiscal footing, and if people want to have a good job here in Wisconsin, they can have it.
Okay. All right, Tom, we got a few questions here, all related to the federal activities versus the state, which you obviously have been familiar with. But right now, it's both a state and a federal issue. As you well know, Wisconsin is now surrounded by states that allow the legal sale of recreational marijuana. But the federal law classifies marijuana as a controlled substance, and as such it's illegal. Is it time for the federal government to decriminalize pot, the federal government?
Yeah, so I think that should be left to the states. The states should be able to make that decision. And if you look at my record and the statements that I put out on a variety of issues, not just marijuana, I believe that the federal government has far too much power. They should be delegating authority to the states, as the founders put forth in our founding documents. I mean, that's how we have true freedom, is when the federal government has less power, states and individuals have that power. To the issue of marijuana, I do think that there's a role for the federal government to play in this. For example, the Centers for Disease Control really should be doing research in regards to the effects of marijuana. Other countries, like in Western Europe and Australia, have done that, and I think they've gotten some good research out of that. That has not happened in our country. But otherwise, the decision whether to legalize or not should fall to the states. And as far as at the state level, I would consider legalizing medicinal marijuana. And I know that there are a few bills wending their way through the legislature, but it should be a state decision.
Okay, that's clear. Let's talk about a really difficult issue, and that's illegal immigration and the wall or the border fences. What is your position on the border fencing on the federal side.
Yeah, I believe the wall should be built by the federal government. This is a fundamental responsibility of the federal government to provide for the safety of the citizens of our country. First of all, to have a strong defense, as we've always had in our country, but also to know who is going in and out of our country. But it goes even deeper than that. When you look at the flow of drugs coming into our country, for example, methamphetamine, that's primarily coming across the Mexican border. In fact, I think it's all coming across the Mexican border at this point. And also human trafficking, a huge problem, and that largely stems from border crossings on the Mexican border. So I do support the wall. And I mean, some of what informs me on this is I've met with local sheriffs here throughout this region, and they really want the federal government to step forward. Our local governments want the federal government to do their duty to make sure that our border is secured, because they're having to handle the problems that flow across our borders, especially the southern border. And it's part of the reason why I have the endorsement of 10 sheriffs here across the 7th Congressional District, because they know I will act on these issues, because they've seen by experience that I will take an active role.
Recently, as you well know, the president authorized the killing of an Iranian general, Soleimani, when he was in Iraq with a drone strike. And there's been some controversy about that. Some say, boy, that was a good idea, it took out a bad guy, and the others say, oh, no, we shouldn't have. So what is your position?
Yeah, President Trump did the right thing. This is a man who has the blood of Americans on his hands. He was the chief architect of Iran's reign of terror, which continues that. I mean, Iran is the chief state sponsor of terrorism, certainly in the Middle East and around the world. And Soleimani is responsible for much of that. So even go beyond the Americans who he had killed. I mean, you look at the thousands of people in the Middle East and how Iran and Soleimani how they destabilized the Middle East. I believe he met his just desserts.
Okay, that's clear. This is a big topic, but maybe we can consolidate it into one portion, which would be climate change and the efforts to go completely green or partially green. Just in general, how do you feel about what the federal government should do about climate change?
Yeah, in regards to climate change, when I hear people talk about it, when I talk to friends, neighbors, constituents about this, I kind of hear two different things. One is people, they're like, yes, we need to make sure that we consume less energy, that we need to be good to the environment. And I think we all agree with that. And actually, we've had some real success here in America as we've transitioned from using less coal and more natural gas, which natural gas is cleaner burning. We've actually reduced our CO2 emissions here in the United States over the last couple decades. So there's been some progress that has been made there. But I think people also think in terms of just the amount of waste that is emitted. They want us to reduce that, and I certainly agree with it. The other part of it that I hear from people is, okay, do we have human-caused climate change? Are humans causing that? And are we going to have proposals or solutions that are put forth to ostensibly to be able to take care of that? The position that I'll take as congressman is that if we're going to do anything like that, China and India have to participate also, because some of the proposals that have been put forth, they have exempted China, Southeast Asia, and India from the solutions to this problem. And much of the emissions that we're seeing coming from other parts of the world come from China. China continues to build more coal plants, and we all know the stories from people who have visited China about how you can hardly breathe the air over there. In order to have any proposals put forth, it has to include China and India if we're going to do that.
Okay. Let's turn to debt, particularly the federal student loan debt, which is currently in excess of $850 billion, and many of the graduates are apparently unable to pay off their loans. The question is, do you think that the federal government should cancel some or all or part of the debt that these students owe?
Yeah, so I have some firsthand experience in this one, Don. I have 2 daughters in college, and I have one in high school, and I suspect she may be going on to college also. And so our daughters, they've taken on a little bit of student debt, and I don't believe it should be your responsibility or our listeners' responsibility to pay for my kids' choice. We made that choice as a family for them to go to college and to take on that debt. It should not be somebody else's responsibility to take on that debt. We've actually done something here in Wisconsin about it, and I've helped do that as a legislator. We have froze tuition here, which will go on, it's going on 8 years now here in Wisconsin, where tuition has not gone up. If you looked at the trajectory of tuition for students that were going to a college in the UW system prior to us freezing tuition, an average student that would finish school in 4 years will save over $5,000 now as a result of the tuition freeze compared to the rising tuition that we had in the past. So we've actually done something about, we actually did something about it in the legislature to try to help control the cost of tuition into our colleges.
Okay. This is a really complex issue here. We're going to talk a little bit about the cost of health care, coverage for pre-existing conditions, and prescription drugs. And you obviously are here in Marshfield, which we have a fairly good-sized complex, and all of us that are in the community are really wondering what's going to happen. So what do you think should be done about it? Obviously there is a problem.
Yeah, healthcare, a big issue, and it's going to be a priority issue of mine, both talking about it during the campaign here, Don, but also as your congressman, it is going to be a focus of my efforts. So I would answer your question in 2 ways. First of all, what should we not do? You go back to the Affordable Care Act, which is about 10 years old now. It was supposed to reduce the cost of health insurance, and it was also, people were going to be able to maintain access to their health care providers. Both of those things did not happen. So it did not work as it was promised to us. Now we have a proposal building on that, which is Medicare for All. And just looking at the estimates of the cost for Medicare for All, which is being proposed by the major Democrat candidates, it will break the system. Medicare for All will end up giving us Medicare for none. If I were a person that was on Medicare, I would be very fearful of this proposal, because if it breaks Medicare, then those people who are currently on Medicare will not have it. Now, what should we do about it? The first thing that we should do is we should bring control back to the states. You look at an innovative program here in Wisconsin from 2 decades ago, provides health insurance for about 1 million people here in Wisconsin, almost 20% of our population. That's Badger Care. Started under Governor Thompson and has provided good health care for a lot of people. There's other ways that we can tackle this. When I did my announcement to run for this office, one of the places we went was Merrill Steel. Merrill Steel's an old line manufacturer, has about 500 employees. They brought their own clinic within their facility about 1.5 years ago. And they have reduced their healthcare costs by having their own clinic. They've even went so far as they have a mobile unit with their healthcare system there that does house calls. Think about it. House calls, something that we used to have 50, 60 years ago. I remember them as a kid. And this company has brought them back through really innovative means, and there's other companies doing the same thing. Now, not all companies are big enough to be able to do that. And by the way, that's providing health care, not just for their employees, but for their dependents also. Really innovative, creative. Something that we could do at the federal level is we could reduce the regulations for association health plans. So that would be smaller companies. Let's say they wanted to band together with their local chamber of commerce. A bunch of businesses wanted to get together to be able to provide health insurance for the owners and for their employees. We have a fair amount of regulations in place at the federal level that impede that at this point. We should remove those regulations and allow greater choice there. One other thing that I would put out there is something that I've championed at the state level, and that's called direct primary care, where you get the insurance companies, the government bureaucracy, everybody out of the middle between the doctor and the patient. And there are direct primary clinics that have popped up across the state of Wisconsin here that are providing affordable primary health care for people. I'll give you an example. I know of clinics around Wisconsin that are charging $50 to $75 a month, and you get all of your primary care taken care of. You can stop into that clinic anytime that you want to. And I think the lesson out of this is we need to give people more choices. Because when we set up a cookie cutter approach, like at the federal level, where it's one size fits all, we all have individualized healthcare needs. We do that better when it's done at the local and state level and when people have options.
Thank you. And that's we mentioned earlier that the student debt and how high it is, but there's also the federal debt, which is, last time I looked, $22 trillion. That's hard to even imagine. But
I hate to say this to you. I hate to break this to you, Don. It's now at 23.
Geez, this is 2 days old. Well, it's a big number.
It's a big number.
Does that bother you any?
It bothers me a lot. It's one of the main reasons that I ran in 2010 for the state legislature. We had a $3.6 billion deficit, and as a small business person who's run a business for 2 decades, run other businesses going on 3 decades, we don't get to do that. And so that was one of the main reasons that I ran for the state legislature. That $3.6 billion deficit, we've wiped it out. The state no longer has that deficit. In fact, we have the largest rainy day fund in the history of the state. With the most recent revenue reestimates that have come out, we're going to be up to about $1 billion, which we have a good rainy day fund. This will be a priority of mine. And I think there's a variety of ways that we can go about that. I'll give you something that I did at the state level. I moved it was my initiative to move a division of the forestry division out of the state of out of the city of Madison and moved it to northern Wisconsin. First time that that's ever been done. And we did it so that it could be run more efficiently and so that it would be more effective being closer to the people that are the forestry users. We could do the same thing in Washington, D.C. And in fact, there's a proposal out there, the Swamp Act, to move some of these divisions of government to other parts of the country. I think that is a possibility, something like that. I think another thing is that I think we do see welfare fraud and abuse. We see Medicaid fraud and abuse. We see food stamp fraud and abuse. Those programs like that, we need to do a better job of making sure that they're not being used fraudulently. And I think that's one of the ways in which we can reduce that deficit. So we did not fix the state deficit with one budget. And I was very clear with people when I campaigned, this will not happen with one budget. And it took a series of budgets. Now I've voted on 5 state budgets, and we've gotten the state into good, sound fiscal condition. It will be the same at the federal level. But I assure our listeners, I will work every day to reduce that deficit, which is now $70,000 for every man, woman, and child. My wife and I would never think of doing something like that to our children, to dump $70,000 of debt on them. Our federal government should not do that either.
One last but tough question. We all know about the terrible mass shootings in schools, religious facilities, anywhere, everywhere, and it's just tragic that there's such a problem. And of course, gun control comes up, and that's a major issue, I believe, in this particular campaign. So, just briefly, as long as you'd like, tell me what you think about gun control in general.
Yeah, so the mass shootings have been horrible, and it's really unfortunate that we've seen this happen in America. And when these happen, I think about my kids, because they've happened when they've been in high school and now with them being in college. And my wife and I mean, we want our kids to be secure. One of the things we did at the state level to address this is we put additional money in for school safety. And there are many, in fact, I think most schools here in Wisconsin have taken advantage of those safety grants to make their entrances more secure, and I think that's been a really good thing. In this most recent budget, we put more money into mental health. It's very clear that people have mental health needs that are not being met, and so I believe we put significantly more money, I don't know the exact amount, Don, but we put significantly more money into mental health and trying to treat those people that have that need. Now, one thing that I won't do is create new gun laws that don't do anything. The first thing that our law enforcement people should be doing, I mean, you think about the Parkland shooting down in Florida, it was very clear that this young man could have been incarcerated if they would have chosen to. And they chose not to. Law enforcement needs to use the tools and the laws that they have in place currently before we create new laws. It is not our job as legislators just to create laws that make us feel good. We want to make sure that they're going to be effective. So let's make sure we enforce existing laws first.
All right. I think that's enough. I know you have a schedule, obviously, that you need to continue forward with, but I would like to give you the opportunity to address our audience and tell them why you should be the survivor in the partisan primary. Democratic, not the Democratic, the Republican one, because there's actually a primary on both sides. So regardless of which party our viewers are partisan to, they should pick their candidate. So why should the Republicans choose you?
Yes, people should get out and vote. People should vote for Tom Tiffany because I'll stand for your freedom. I grew up on a dairy farm in western Wisconsin, 5 brothers, 2 sisters, and Mom and Dad always taught us we have a world of opportunity, and we've all done that. I have 3 daughters now who are young adults. I want them to have the same opportunity as my brothers and sisters had to experience those freedoms, the great opportunity that is America. And I will defend your freedoms. I will defend your Second Amendment rights. I will defend the unborn. What has happened in our country with some people who are advocating for basically infanticide is wrong. We need to defend the unborn. But most of all, I will defend your freedoms. When I put my hand on the Bible, I swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, and I will uphold that Constitution if I'm your next congressman. I ask for your vote and your support on February 18th. Thank you.
We've been visiting with Tom Tiffany, who was gracious enough to stop by our studio and share his views. Again, the primary is February 18th, and the survivors of the primary, Democrat and Republican, will meet together on May 12th. So we certainly would like our viewers to keep those 2 dates in mind and to vote, because that's how we elect our representatives. You get the person you want, but if you don't vote, hey, too bad.
You got to vote.
All right.
Get out and vote. 2020 is going to be a big year.
We have 5 elections in the city. So thank you all for watching, and stay tuned. We have candidates with the from other candidates that will also present their views for us. So thanks, Tom.
Thank you for having me here today, Don.